Hello, everybody. I'm Bob Mover, and I'd like to welcome you to another uh, episode of our podcast on the real side. And often I have guests talking with me about discussions about their lives and where our lives often intertwined, and the music and uh, our feelings about that. And every once in a while, I do a show which is just me, myself, and I talking about my particular experiences in the music. I did a couple, and people seem to have liked it, so I'm going to continue doing them. So this episode, I'm just going to talk a little bit about a couple of people who were influential on my life. And people ask me sometimes, when you were young, how did you get to meet these people, and how did you do that? Because you seem to have just gotten so many influences in your life that you just did you how did you know that them? And I said, really, I think you have more courage often when you're in your teens and early 20s than maybe you do in your 30s. Even sometimes, at 30 you probably should have, or I felt like I actually was kind of became a little more shy. But when I was a teenager, I really was so hungry for knowledge. Well, I was the same hunger actually still existed. But it's sort of like in life, that childlike mind that that you live with at that time. You think that how could anybody reject me because I'm sincere? And you feel like that, and often that pays off because you're not competing. And I think people see their younger selves before, maybe before the world got to them, even. And even as a father, I try to keep in my three daughters uh, the feeling of that girlhood and that kind of innocence that that they came into the world with, and you just want to see have that stay. So in some way, I've tried to maintain that, and there have been periods in my life where I think I was too grown up. Personally, I got like that, but maybe we go back to being our childlike selves, or having like what you call maybe the Zen mind. That's why old people, I think, are often found adorable in the same way children are by a lot of people. That so anyway, I won't philosophize too much more about that. But the way I did it, and you know, was being a young person. If I liked someone, and sometimes that person knew someone I knew, I would just approach them and tell them I like them, and uh, would like to learn some things from them. I think the fact that Ira Sullivan was such an important influence on me. I met Ira when I was 13 years old, and had only been playing the saxophone a few weeks. And I've told that story about Ira, um, which I'll just recapitulate, because that really was the thing that sent me into this world. Um, Even though my dad had been a musician, I met a few musicians, but I did it on my own. Um, it actually began with Stan Getz when my mother, who was you know a wonderful woman and very strange and very different type of person, and she had been, when she was a kid, she had gone out and started hanging out in Boston in the jazz clubs like Storyville and those the famous Boston clubs, and with people like Nat Hentoff, the jazz critic, and Don Costa, who later became more or less the head arranger for Frank Sinatra and wrote the famous arrangement that Sinatra did of New York, New York. Um, so my mother was friends even with Vic Dickinson and some of the great trombonists, and she would go to these places and hear sessions when she was 16, and a young person herself. Then she went to New York, and she met Billie Holiday, and she had her own little adventures. And so when I got an interest in jazz, when I was actually, I was still 12, and I started to listen. And my first influence was Lester Young, and then I heard Bird, and then I heard Stan Getz, and Stan Getz, being white and Jewish, having the same ethnic background that I had, it made me feel that, oh, this music maybe is not only for black people, that there are white people that do this. So I got a lot of Stan Getz records, and we were kind of poor, and and we actually fell from being fairly moderately wealthy to nothing. And one of my mother's great love after my father left was a racetrack gambler named Bernie. And Bernie had a few things that he did. And one thing that he would do was he would sell records, uh, LPs, 33s, at the track. And the way Bernie obtained these records was rather interesting. He had a London fog type raincoat that he had someone, I wasn't sure if he did it, but I think somebody sewed in a special pocket on the inside that was the size of an LP. And he would go, in those days, I think, things weren't really computerized. There were these little codes on records, but they weren't, things were much simpler. And so Bernie would steal these records. He would go to Jordan Marsh department store, usually not a record store, but a department store, because they would be not so always, a lot of people just browsed in the department store and didn't necessarily buy anything. And, security was a little lax. So Bernie might take these, and he would grab mostly Andy Williams records and Dean Martin and Steve Lawrence, Eddie Gourmet, Keely Smith, records that were more commercially oriented. And he would take them to the track and sell them at a discount. And so that was that would cover the money he lost at the track, and or part of it. Anyway, he was a great guy, loved the cat. And it ultimately didn't work out with my mom. But Bernie would he'd say, anything you'd like at the record store. And I would say, well, if you see any Charlie Parker, he knew the ones I had, don't get these. But, so he managed to steal most of Stan Getz's catalog for me. And so I had a lot of Stan Getz records. And I, could sing along with all these records. That anything I got, I automatically sang along with it. Nobody told me to do that, and it wasn't an assignment. It was just I love this music, and I wanted to participate in it. So, I kind of invented what you might call interactive listening, though I'm sure I know I didn't invent it, because as I met these great musicians, it seems that everybody who was worth anything in music had done a lot of singing with records, sometimes just as much as they played. I found that out from a lot of people, because it was like what Gary Bartz and I were talking about a couple of weeks ago, the importance of listening, how just listening, um, people come to me for lessons sometimes, and they've got no concept. They don't really understand how to play eighth notes. I mean, I usually teach a more advanced student, so I don't have to deal with that problem. But even more advanced students, sometimes they've done a lot of playing and a lot of practicing, but sometimes they don't swing right. or something because they really haven't absorbed the by osmosis, the conception of the music. When you can feel, um, when you can feel the feeling that the musician is putting into it, which that's where you can read the real book forever. But if you can't feel, I unfortunately, because I have emphysema and I had this operation, I've been intubated so many times that they put in this tracheostomy, and this is my little speaking valve, with which I use to speak and to play. And the unfortunate repercussion of that particular tracheostomy was I lost my singing voice. So I have like less than an octave's range. But as a kid, I had a very good range, and I still feel I can feel the rhythms. And I still like to sing, but it was very important to sing along. So I would sing all these solos, and today I'm basically going to talk a little bit about how you meet people in the music, and my dog agrees. Um, you may hear the dog in the background sometimes. We've got a couple of dogs here, very nice animals. But so the thing is to meet. How do meeting these people and kind of finding out how they learned. So I was growing up in Miami at this point, and Stan Getz was giving a concert at Miami-Dade Junior College, and he was giving the concert. He was actually giving one concert in the morning, and then another concert in the evening. The morning concert was like 11 o'clock, and the evening concert was I think it was 8:30, and something like 8 o'clock. And it was a school day, and my mother came up with a great. I said, I really got to go hear Stan. I really want to go hear Stan. And so she said, well, I said, I'm afraid they're going to send me to school or something. They'll see me, they know I'm not in college because I look. I mean, I'm 12 years old. So actually I was 13, and it was October, no, September. I think September 24th, 1965. Yeah, something like that. Anyway, I went to the college, and I got there really early. My mother told me, what you got to do is tell them you're with a junior high school newspaper, and you're covering the concert for your school newspaper, and that's why you're there in the morning like that, in case anybody asks. I don't even remember if anybody asked. Anyway, I came very early to the concert, and it was quite a ways from our house, Dade Junior College. But I was there, and I, as I was there, Roy Haynes, Steve Swallow on bass, and Gary Burton on vibes. Roy, of course, the great drummer. They had all arrived already, and it was about an hour. I got there about 9:30. The buses were all on time, unusual for Miami, but they got me there early. And I'm there, and I was watching them set up their instruments, and I just started to talk to them. I said, you know, I'm a big fan of you guys are playing with Stan, and like, oh yeah, and I didn't really know. I was so naive. I didn't even know who Roy Haynes was, and Steve Swallow was young, and Gary Burton. That was like one of their first gigs that they got, so they weren't really known yet. But they were very nice. I said I was a big fan of Stan, and that I was trying to play drums, which I was trying to play some drums. We had a set of drums in our house, and I did not have the coordination. I was born with this gross motor difficulty, whatever that's called, and it gave me difficulty with coordination, which is another story. But suffice it to say, I wasn't gonna get to the point where Roy Haynes would lose any sleep over me on my drumming. But I was sincere, and I've been playing drums along with records, and I think that helped me quite a bit too. Listening to records and just trying to keep time on the drums while I did it. So anyway, I was there, and Roy Haynes showed me about the ride cymbal. I asked him some stuff, and he was very nice about it and very friendly. And the other guys were there, and um, I wanted to know if they wanted coffee. I told them all about my love for Stan and how I had all these records and how I could sing many of his solos. And so they, they seemed a little bit, interested in that. And I said, I don't have enough money to buy you guys coffee and stuff, but if you want some coffee or donuts, I saw the cafeteria, and I'd be happy to go and, pick up some breakfast stuff or something like that if you guys want me to. And they said, oh, that would be great. Why don't you go pick us up, a coffee and a donut and this and that, and get yourself something. I think Steve Swaller, one of those guys, gave me a little extra money to go get myself one too. So I thanked them, and I came back. I was there. I bought the stuff, and as I came back, I heard Stan playing "The Shadow of Your Smile," and that was a new tune at that time because it wasn't even known as "The Shadow of Your Smile" yet. I mean, I had never heard it, but it was called "Love Theme from the Sandpiper," which was the movie with Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, I believe, that the song was the theme song from. So Stan was playing "The Shadow of Your Smile," and he was playing it. He was playing it, and I still remember the lick that he was playing. Something tells me I've told you this story before, but he was going like. I said that he, but I just remember he did that little lick that. So that's what he was playing, and I came back and was so shocked to hear that sound live and everything that I practically spilled the coffee on Gary Burton because I was carrying it in these trays, and it was. But I didn't. I spilled the coffee, but it missed him, fortunately, because he had this nice gray suit on, and it would have been very bad to have done that. But I was blessed and you know, got lucky and didn't spill that coffee on anybody. And then Stan said, "Oh, so you're the kid that has my records and stuff." He said, "The guys were telling me about you." He said, "You can sing my records." They said, "You can sing my solos and stuff." He said, "Can you?" I said, "Yeah, I know quite a few, not everything, but a lot." He said, "Man, can you sing me one?" So I sang Hershey Bar, a tune that he had played with Horace Silver on a record that I had. It's a Johnny Mandel tune, basically based on Honeysuckle Rose, but it's like ba ba da ba do beep ba 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 da ba beep ba da ba do beep ba ba da ba, because I could no longer sing. So the solo went. The head was basically the bridge, but I remember the solo began. Well, anyway, I won't even play that, but I'll just do this part. I'll just say, Hershey Bar, I went like. Etc. So I sang that to him, and then I sang the solo, which was like, etc. So I knew the solo, and he was kind of impressed with that. And he, I said, I've got a little bit of a problem, because they had told me that the front rows were all reserved for people that for the faculty and the music department and this and that, and that I could stay for the concert because it wasn't open to the public. The nighttime concert was going to be open to the public, but the daytime concert was just for the faculty and the students. So oh, Stan was complaining too. It was really funny. He said, it's 11 o'clock in the morning. I'm never up at 11 o'clock in the morning. He said, even in Miami, and if I'm up at 11 o'clock in Miami, I go to the beach right away, put on my suntan lotion, and and sit in the sun. But I don't, I don't go out and play my horn at 11 in the morning. What am I doing here? And he was laughing about it. And he said, I said, there's a problem. They want me to sit way in the back. He said, whoa, no, my man. Call me my man. He said, you know what? I got an idea. I sweat a lot when I play. And it's kind of hot in this auditorium, which was like the gymnasium, I think. And, I guess they got some kind of air conditioner on, but it's not really making it. And I sweat a lot. And he joked because he could tell I was Jewish too. He said, you know how we Jews sweat? He said something like that. We really sweat. So, what if we'll put you in the back corner of the stage, and you can join us on the bandstand. And when I need the towel, I'll get some towels for you to sit with. And when I need a towel, I'll look around, and and you'll know to give me the towel. You just walk up and hand me the towel. So I said, that sounds wonderful. So that's what I did. I handed him the towel during the concert, and then later on, he had a press conference, and he took me to the press conference with him. And people said, "Is this your son, Mr. Getz?" He say, "No, just a friend." And the thing is, Stan was not really known for his human kindness among people. But that's the thing. When you're a child, people understand you in a way, and they really, people can be very sweet. Um, Later on in life, it's not always the case, is it? But anyway, so what happened was, he said, "Well, I've got another concert to do tonight." He said, "And I want to." He said, I'm going to leave my horn here, and I'll put it in a closet, and they're going to lock up the closet." He said, "But you never know. People try to get into things and this and that." He said, "Maybe would you make sure just coming by? You're going to hang out till tonight, right?" I said, "Yeah, of course." And I wouldn't miss it for the world. He said, "Great. Well, if you want to, just take a check." He said, "You don't have to sit in front of it all the time, but just make sure nobody's trying to break into the closet or do some stuff, funny stuff. So I'd really appreciate that if you do that." And I said, "Man, I'd be so happy to do that." So the horn and the closet it was in kind of a coat closet, and it wasn't far from the cafeteria. So I, of course, did sit right in front of the horn for the next. It was about after the press conference. The concert was like 11 to about 12:30. They played about an hour and a half or so. So it was close to 2. And I had 6 hours that I sat. I got a chair, and I pulled myself sitting in front of the closet. This little, almost 200-pound 13-year-old I was sitting there guarding Stan's horn, making occasional trips to the cafeteria. They had a very good meatball sandwich, as I recall. So I think I ate 3 or 4 of those. I No, I probably didn't, because I don't think we had the money for 3 or 4, but I had 2 at least. And that night, um, Stan showed up, and he said, "Well, you're going to sit on the stage with us again, right?" I said, "Wow, thank you." So I told him, he said that before, actually, before he left for the day. He said, "You come back on the stage with us. It really helps me when you hand me those towels." I said, "Oh, sure." So I called my mother, and she was going to come. She did not at the last moment. She decided not to for some reason. She had, as I said, she was a little bit, she was a, strange woman, and had some agoraphobia and various things. She had her demons, so she didn't show up. But my younger brother and my younger sister, Joy, who was 2.5, 3 years younger than me, and my brother Richard, who's 7 years younger than me, they showed up with my mom's boyfriend Bernie, who, the fellow who had been the racetrack gambler who stole me the records. They sat up and they watched me sitting on the stage with Stan, and even though I wasn't playing, I felt I was part of the band. They made me feel like that. And so after the concert was over, I had this. Oh yeah, I did record this. It's on the internet. Actually, the story I'm telling now, but I guess I'll tell it again. that I I I stayed there for the concert, and then after the concert, I asked Stan for. I decided I was going to play the saxophone, and I had friends that had saxophones, played in the school band, and as I recall, they didn't practice very much, so maybe they'd let me borrow their horn and show me the basic things about the horn, and I'd start playing. So I said, "Stan, I'm thinking I may want to start playing the saxophone. Can you give me a read?" Because I thought it would be a good sign if the first read I play on a saxophone would be from you. So he took the reed right off the horn that he had played that night and that afternoon at the concert. And he said, "Here, this one's about played through." He said, "You can have this one." So he put it in a reed cover and gave it to me. Of course, it was a number 4.5 recall. which is about as hard to read besides a 5 that you can play, and that means it's very resistant. So I put it on the horn and took my friend Kenny White's, and who had the tenor. It was a King Cleveland model, it was called. And I took the mouthpiece. He showed me how to put the reed on the mouthpiece and gave me his mouthpiece. And I did it a big blow, and absolutely nothing came out, just air. And he said, "Oh, what do you got?" He said, "Oh, he gave you 4.5 reeds." He said, "Nobody, you got to be an accomplished musician to get a sound out of that." He said, "Try this," and he gave me a number 2, and I got the sound. And because I've listened to so much music, which is an interesting thing too, that sound is in your head. In fact, when I was just doing Stan Getz imitation, it was a more breathy sound than I usually get, even because I can hear his sound and the sound I want to make. So that was a kind of thing. I just when you understand how the instrument has to sound, you learn faster. So with over the weekend, I borrowed Kenny's horn. He showed me the fingerings, and I got a fingering chart, and I learned to play the chromatic scale. And the next weekend, I took it home again. Well, actually, I started to take it home after school because he didn't really practice. And I took it home again and learned major scales, and then a couple of Stan Getz licks. So within a week, I could play most of the major scales and the chromatic scale, of course, and a couple of Stan's little phrases. I was copying the record he did called Focus, which he did with the string quartet. Very good record. And so that happened with that. And the story. There are more chapters to it, but I'll cut that one there. I did run into him again, and actually had a nice, part of that story to tell you next time. Other meetings with musicians have been very. This DJ named Alan Rock, who later became Bozo the Clown in Orlando, was had a jazz radio show, and I've told this story too, which was called Jazz on the Rocks, and he had a real cool radio voice. "I'm Alan Rock, and I'm here to bring you," with the walking bass behind him. Jazz on the rocks. And Alan gave away records if you guessed the person. And I guessed a few people right, so he had a bunch of records at the station to for me to pick up. So I came to the station. His show was on from midnight to like 3 or 4 in the morning, and it was at this radio station in Miami Beach, and we happened to be living at a kind of a home for children called the Drexel School, which was kind of funky. But the beautiful thing was, I was 13, and I had just started to play the horn. And been playing a few months only, and we lived there. My mother couldn't take us, and so we were on our own. But the great thing about being in that situation is you have no supervision. So I got out. Nobody cared where I went. So midnight, I just left. I take my bicycle and ride. It had a light on it. Ride the bike the 10 minutes it took to get to the radio station, and go and hang out with Alan. And Alan, like I always tell people, I think he thought I was a woman because I had this high-pitched voice, and my name was Bobby. So my mother was actually Bobby. They called her, she was Barbara, and we were both Bobbies. I was Robert Bobby, she was Barbara Bobby. But it was not my mother, it was me. So I think he was a little bit disappointed when this 220-pound 13-year-old showed up. Boy, but he was sweet. And he actually said, "You mean you knew all these people?" Because it was a blindfold test, you could guess. And I'd been really listening to a lot of records. So like Dexter Gordon wasn't very known at that time. I remember that because he had not come back to America. He was a saxophone player, an expatriate living in Europe, and I was already hanging with Ira. Well, I hadn't met Ira yet. That's right. So I was listening to these records, and I could tell him. I heard Dexter Gordon, and he has very distinctive sound, so you don't have to listen to that much to know. I noticed that about musicians, that the better known ones, you just had to hear them a couple times, and it was just like a movie star. You're not going to mistake um, Marlon Brando from Michael Caine. I mean, it was just, and yeah, everybody had their own individual signature. So they had a, so, when I heard someone I could guess, so I'd guessed a few times. He had about 3 or 4 records for me. Wasn't like I had a stack of records, but he said, "Why don't you come by the station and pick up the records?" So I did, and he was kind of impressed with my little that I'd known. I told him I'd met Stan Getz, and decided to play saxophone because of Stan and all of this. And he said, "Well, why don't you? Um, I'll interview you." So Alan, so we've got this 13-year-old boy here, and he loves jazz, and we're going to talk to him about what he listens to and why and what he likes, and so then I'd come in more often, and he'd say, "Want to do the show together tonight?" So he'd say, "Go ahead, choose a record." There was a record library in the station. He'd say, "What do you want to hear?" And he'd do that. He'd play a couple of tunes, and then I'd get one selection, and I'd say, "Well, I've heard about this guy, and or this, it might be a female singer, like Carmen McRae." I remember I had never heard Carmen McRae, and they had a Carmen McRae record there. So I said, "Who is she?" I mean, I've heard that. I've read about her in Downbeat because I was reading Downbeat all the time. That was at that time. That was like, the Bible of jazz. All the names that were mentioned were valid, and it wasn't just trying to sell instruments for the music companies. Though it did that too. There were a lot of cool ads about with the musicians. So and so plays this instrument, and sometimes they were famous people. Sometimes there were people that weren't even that famous, but they endorsed the instruments. Anyway, I was you know I had heard a lot of these names in Downbeat. So Carmen McRae was somebody I read, and Alan would say, "Oh, now Bobby's just chosen um, Carmen McRae record. Here's one I really like. Guess who I saw today, my dear." And so we would play that. So I was getting educated at the same time while I was getting to choose songs on a radio show that Miami, the whole city, was listening to, and even the Bahamas, they got the show. Had a wide band, as they say. So Alan was producing jazz concerts as well. And I had been asking everybody about Ira Sullivan. Whenever I'd go down and hear, I would go to sometimes the club and I'd take my bike. And if there was a little jazz trio somewhere or something, they kept saying, "Well, if you're interested in jazz, you got to hear Ira Sullivan. He's the real deal." And, because sometimes there would be very commercial trios. They'd sound good, but they were playing very kind of Ramsey Lewis like and that type of thing. But funky or more square. So Alan said, "Oh, I'm doing a concert on Sunday. I'm producing this concert at the Coconut Grove Coffee House, and you can get in because they serve food there. So it's not just alcohol, and you're underage, but you're not underage to eat. So we can bring you there, and you can hear Ira Sullivan." So I went to hear Ira, and it was one of those epiphanies where it was around Christmas time. I think Christmas had just kind of passed, and there was Ira with Dolph Castellano on piano and a bass player named Jimmy Glover. Interestingly enough, I went to ask Barry Harris, and I got to know Jimmy a little bit. and he stressed the importance of learning chords, which I was just playing by ear. And Jimmy said you really should know the changes. Yeah, and I said, what are changes really? And he said, well, there's a thing called 5-to-1, 2-5-1. You got to learn your 2-5-1s, and I didn't even know what that meant, but I knew that I should learn them because Jimmy said so. But Ira didn't really know chords in the technical sense. He was like Chet Baker and Zoot Sims, and even Stan. He knew what key was in, which Chet didn't even know that half the time, but he knew what his first note was. And you know, so Ira was. I was determined not to learn by ear without knowing the changes and to make myself hear everything. Uh, a little later, I met Phil Woods, who gave me a scholarship to his summer camp, and there they taught you harmony. And Phil knew everything about chords, and I decided, well, I should probably know this stuff. So that's how that began. But Ira, Jimmy Glover was on bass, and the thing I was going to say was I was talking to Barry Harris, and the late wonderful teacher, player, and teacher Barry, and I said, Barry, who showed you this stuff? And he said, well, in Detroit, there was a guy. He played bass. He played with Dinah Washington for quite a while, and he played with the Cats, and he influenced people like Paul Chambers, and these people was a little older than everybody. Jimmy Glover. I said, Jimmy Glover. I met Jimmy Glover when I was 13 years old, and he told me to learn changes. He said, well, he told you right. And it turned out that it was interesting how Barry and I had sort of the same. He was the guy that actually told Barry what a 2-5-1 was, too. So that was interesting. So anyway, he was on drums, and a drummer named Buddy Delco, who was very cool. Buddy Delco. Um, I'm not going to say he was strung out. I don't know what he was, but he was a cool guy. I mean, he was like a cat. He looked like a cat. He had this little cat-like mustache, and he wore glasses, um, purple, pinkish purple glasses, like granny glasses, what they used to call granny glasses. Very little tiny squares over his eyes. So he was on drums, and these guys looked so cool. I mean, Dolph and Tony and Ira and Jimmy, racially mixed, and just playing beautifully. And Ira began the day with Star Eyes. I remember he played it on tenor, and Ira plays saxophone and trumpet. And a little later, he picked up flute and played flute and piccolo and alto flute and played alto, tenor, and soprano. He also started to play and trumpet and flugelhorn. Um, he had a band with, there's a record, Roland Kirk's first record, Rasan, is called Introducing Roland Kirk, and Ira Sullivan's on it. And they used to play in Chicago, which is where Ira was from. And he had moved down to Miami because his wife, Charlene, needed to be there for her health. She has some breathing trouble, and they said Miami was a good place. They got to get out of the Chicago winters. So Ira went down there, and there was uh, uh, so and Ira didn't travel a lot through the years, but he was a wonderful player. He just passed about, I guess it's 2 years now. I'm not good at knowing how long it's been, but Ira was uh, he he played all these instruments and all equally well. He wasn't like a trumpet player that played some saxophone or saxophone player that played some trumpet. I suppose trumpet, he said, was his real, his particularly, he felt he was the strongest on that, but there are people that would differ with that. Anyway, Ira was playing everything that day, and he knew a million tunes, and he was, he had played with Charlie Parker right before Bird died. He played in Chicago in a place called the Beehive, and there was a picture of Ira, which I'd seen that before I met Ira. There was a picture I'd seen in Downbeat of Ira with these horn rimmed glasses on. You just saw half of his face, but it said Ira Sullivan playing with Charlie Parker in 1950, 54 or early 55, just a few months before Bird died. In fact, Charlie had asked Ira to come with him and be in the next band he was going to make, and to come to New York. And then he died before Ira could get there. But anyway, he was playing that, and then after that, he played "Walking in the Winter Wonderland" with the Harmon Mute, like da 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 da. He played it like almost the way Miles played "Bye Bye Blackbird" and "All of You" with that real sexy Harmon Mute in. And then he played a tune by Charles Lloyd called "Sweet Georgia Bright," not "Sweet Georgia Brown," but it was called I remember that. I don't remember, never. Well, I learned the tune a long time ago. I don't remember it now. But he played that, and he played old folks. I remember that. It's funny because we're talking about 1965 and 75, 85, 95, 2005, 2015, almost 60 years ago, and I still remember that set like it was last week. And so, you know, and then when they finished the set, Alan Rock uh, brought me over and introduced me to Ira. And then right away, once again, I was the only 13-year-old in the house, and Ira, said, like Alan tells me, you even know, something about, the music. You can identify musicians when you hear them, and this and that. I said, yeah. He said, I was like that too. He said, right around your age. He said, I could, I was pretty dedicated already. I said, well, I think I am too. I'm really, I think I might want to be an actor too. Because at that age, you think, yeah, I'll win the downbeat poll, and then I'll win an Academy Award. Probably do it the same year. Because, one has that kind of confidence uh, before the world knocks you around a little. But, some people retain that, you know. I mean, Jocko had that kind of confidence. He was absolutely sure that he was great, and he was right. What he did, he was great at it, and he was his own favorite bass player, as I used to tell people. And when I met Jocko, I said, "Who's your favorite bass player?" He said, "Me." I said, "With all the bass players in the world, you're your own favorite bass player." He says, "Yeah. What's wrong with that?" I said, "Well, I guess nothing." I suppose that's just, and unfortunately, Jocko had those mental problems that he didn't have anything. It wasn't his fault. I believe he was just naturally what they used to call manic depressive. Now they call it bipolar. But that tied in with a certain self-destructive urge. But you know, he didn't really evidence that. There was no evidence of that when we were teenagers, when we knew each other. I mean, at least the negative side of it. I mean, I kind of envied Jocko for having that much self-confidence. I never met anybody my age that believed in himself that strongly. Anyway, that's another story, which we won't get into here. But anyway, Ira, he said to me, the next thing he told me some stories. I said, what was Charlie Parker like? And he told me some interesting things about Bird. One thing he told me that I will never forget was he said, what one thing that Bird could do was he could adapt his vernacular to whom he was speaking. So he said, for instance, if a guy came up and said, "Hey, Bird, you sound, you beautiful man, you a gas, you the end, you're used and spoken the slang of the day, you too much, Bird, man, and Bird would go right into the vernacular, yeah, baby, thanks, man, I'm trying to hit it, but I had to cool it for a minute and blah blah blah, but now I'm back on the scene, and I'm like, he talks like that, and then someone else comes up, Mr. Parker. I'm a physician at John at what is a big hospital in Chicago, and I specialize in toxic medicine and this and that, and thusly and therefore I listened to that, and Bird was right in with the well, thusly and therefore, of course, yes, I understand. And, you know, he would be speaking highfalutin English with this guy, and then turn around again and say, "Oh, you know, baby, you know, you know," and like he'd turn. He said, "So I really realized that that was a good thing to do. So I strive to be able to adapt to who I'm talking to." He says, "Because the hip thing is when you tell a person, uh, when you can change vernaculars like that." He said, "I noticed that Bird did that, and when he did it, you give the people the feeling that they're talking to themselves through you." And then Woody Allen made the movie Zelig, which is all about a guy who does that in every situation. You know, he's talking to a rabbi, he becomes an Orthodox Jew. He's talking to a Dixieland musician, he actually becomes black. You know, so that was a very funny movie in that way. Some ways, my favorite of Woody Allen's films, just, for his philosophical viewpoint. But anyway, so Ira said, "So you ever eat Mexican food?" And of course, I never had eaten Mexican food. There was hardly any Mexican food to find in Miami in those days. Cubans had just started coming to Miami. So you could have a few Latin restaurants if you went to the Cuban part of town, which I had been brought there a couple of times, but never had any Mexican food. So for the first time, I had tacos and burritos and tamales and all that, and you know, and Ira told me that he was uh, he had this car. He said, "Come on, we'll go in my car." And this is almost like I told the story of Kenny Dorham driving a taxi, and I thought that that was his car. When I met Kenny Dorham, once again, I was a little bit older than that. I was like 16, 17, and I thought that his car. I said, "This is the coolest thing. You drive a taxi as your personal car." Wow. So and KD fell down, almost fell on the ground, laughing and saying, "No, man, this is not my car. This is a taxi. I drive this taxi. It's for a living. I have it tonight. I'm going to drop you and Evelyn Blakey, who she was taking me, off because I was spending the night in Evelyn's living room, you know, and come up for a minute, and then I'm going back out, and I'm going to drive until the early hours of the afternoon, until early afternoon, because it was 4 in the morning." He said, "I'm going to pick up people, and they're going to pay me. Then I'm going to bring the cab back. I don't, I don't own this cab, you know. I just." And so Ira told me it was the year was 65, and his car was like something like I think it was a 1956, 57 DeSoto, or one of those big gas guzzlers that they used to have. And Ira said, we're going to this. Here's my car. And I thought that he was putting me on, that that was a joke, that, you know what I mean? Because I had met Stan Getz, and Stan was the other jazz musician I had met, and he was pretty. Stan had money. Of course, he'd had the Bossa Nova records that just happened, and all this, and he always had a good living, made a good living, Stan, because he was working for Norman Granz, and he was one of what you'd call the chosen. And many are called, but few are chosen. And Stan was definitely chosen. Um, and it's funny how sometimes the chosen ones, Chet was chosen too. They didn't always take advantage of that. I guess they took advantage of that they worked constantly. That was true. But the way they lived wasn't always like the chosen. But anyway, I thought that jazz musicians, even though my dad was not a wealthy musician, he was working in the pit of the orchestra at the Diplomat Hotel and playing club dates and bar mitzvahs and weddings. And but to me, that wasn't being like a jazz star. And Stan Getz was a star. And hearing Ira play, I figured he had to be at least as wealthy as Stan Getz because he was just as good. And Ira said, "No, I don't have that kind of money or that kind of." He said, "This is really my car." Because I was like, "You got to be kidding! No, this isn't your car." He said, "Hey, she's very insensitive to what she hears." my car. Don't insult her. Be nice to her. She got me from Chicago to here. She did that, and that's not an easy task. I said, really? Wow. He said, yeah. And then I said, well, you mean you don't travel all around like Stan and play everywhere and go all over the world and do that? He says, no, I haven't done much of that. He said, I stayed in Chicago for quite a while, and and then I traveled different places from Chicago, and now I'm down in Miami because my wife has this condition. I have to, and I've got to we're making a life here. My parents live down here. They moved here from Chicago. They had a restaurant in Chicago, and they're down here, so it's sort of family thing. I said, so what are you doing? He said, well, actually, until a couple of weeks ago, I've been down here. I guess he'd been down for a few months. He said, I try to get these little gigs that Alan produces, and you know, but right now Alan is my source of the only jazz life. Jazz. Any money I'm making from playing jazz is really coming from Alan. And I don't teach at school. Schools were just starting to have jazz. There was, there weren't a lot of jazz departments. He said, but I said, so what do you do? I mean, you told me you have a daughter, and he had a daughter, his daughter Leslie, who's now known as Sonny Sullivan, was Leslie Sullivan. And he said, well, I have my daughter, and he later had two more sons who were still around, Brevard and Brogan. And he said, I, um, he said, until recently I had a job at Burger King. I said, you were working at Burger King? The way you play, you mean to tell me that? I mean, you got to be kidding me. No, he said, well, it's the same. You do what you can. You have a family, and they've got to eat. He said, and one thing at Burger King, he said they don't like you to take the leftovers, so we don't do that. He said, but I had enough money to buy them, to feed them food, and he said it wasn't so bad. He said, after all, they let me wear the little king hat, and like Ira never lost his inner child, and he also had a very strong relationship to God. He was a very strong Christian and would read me passages from the Bible. And as our relationship developed and grew, which would be a friendship that would last over 50 years, um, Ira would tell me all about. We'd sit in the car and the famous driveway conversations that and we would discuss. He would quote the Bible. He had a very good, almost, I think he had a kind of photographic type of memory. So he would tell me things about, he would quote Jesus, he would quote St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas, and he would quote Henry Miller, and he would quote Charlie Parker and, and jazz musicians who had told him things. He was very eclectic, and, New Testament, Old Testament, Ira had. Uh, and like I said, Henry Miller, D.H. Lawrence, he was not just the sexy guys, but he had a wide variety of sources. And that day we went and we had the Mexican food, and he called my mother because at this point we were not living at the children's school anymore. We'd gone back. My mother had gotten an apartment, so we were all, my brother, sister, and I were living with our mother again. And Ira was considerate. I remember that he said, well, it's now around 9:30. You better tell your mother where you are, and that you're going to be okay. And he took the phone and he said, hi, this is Mover. And she said, call me Barbara, call me Bobby. He said, well, I'm your son's delightful young lad. He's hanging out with me. And he introduced himself, and I'll bring him home. And my mother said, well, I know he's safe. There's no hurry. Bring him home, or not. I mean, I don't think that, but bring him home. So we did that, and I started to see Ira very regularly, and he also said, "What kind of horn are you playing?" Because I told him I just gotten a saxophone, and he said, "What is it?" I told him it was a Holton, and that I paid $35, which was like about $150 then. My aunt had sent me the money for it. My mother's aunt, so my great aunt, Aunt Eve, and she sent me the horn, the money for the horn, and I had gotten this Holton alto in a pawn shop on Flagler Street in Miami, and it was the way Stan described his first horn was silver turning green, and and so Ira said, "Well, let me see if it's maybe it needs some work." I said, "Yeah, I don't have money to fix it." He said, "Oh, I have a repairman friend who, like, I think he would be happy to do what he can to fix it up." So actually, um, Ira met me in downtown and took me out for a sandwich, and I gave him the horn, and he brought it to the repairman, whose name was Joe Wydick, who was originally from Philadelphia. Very nice guy. I had actually met him at the concert, and he said, "Well, Joe says it's not really worth saving. This horn is in such bad shape, and that." But he did do a couple of things that'll make it easier for you to play. So he did do some fixing of it, and eventually I got a better horn. But so having known Ira, then it was just easier to and met Stan, and seeing that these guys were very human. Um, it was it was after that it was easier to meet people, and so that was my first couple of meetings with great musicians, and then that led to other meetings, and there's a couple of stories, boys and girls. That's it for today, as Dean Martin would say. Um, if you could give us a like and subscribe and tell your friends that you can, give us a like and subscribe. It helps us more than you know, and it's free. And, I almost said become a member, but then we are not a cult. This is, you know, we said subscribe. So you don't subscribe to a cult. And anyway, this is something we do because we love it. And if you love this music, then this is, we come up with very interesting guests and good stories. And we've got some wonderful guests coming up again. George Coleman's going to do a part 2. And Randy Brecker with his wife, Ada Rovati, Ada Rovati, Italiana, Ada Rovati. That's how it has to be said, with the hands too, Ada Rovati. And she's actually an excellent tenor player, very serious musician herself. And, so those are coming up. Also, um, this month, well, the end of the month now, but at the beginning of the month, February 2nd, Stan Getz would have turned 97 years old. And he and Sonny Stitt shared a birthday, and it would have been Sonny Stitt's centennial. And so, Stan would have turned 97 years old. Um, Stan made a lot of records. So, I'm not going to recommend any in particular because he made so many great ones that, it's well worth hearing whatever you can. One of the first records that I really went crazy with Stan Getz was a record, though, on Verve called Stan Getz and J.J. Johnson at the Opera House. And there was another record called Stan Getz at the Shrine. There's a record with Strange Later called Focus. Sweet Rain is a very interesting Stan Getz record where he really, one thing Stan did is, and Ira did the same thing. They always had hip, younger players with them who kind of, they didn't want to stay in one place, and stagnancy was kind of an enemy to them. And, you know, there were a few players like that. Lee Konitz, too. These players were very inspiring, that they wanted to constantly kind of pick the brains of the young cats. Ira, there are some beautiful records that he made. One of my favorites, and the first one that I heard, and now they've released actually all the extra tracks. There was more than was originally released. There's a record called Bird Lives, which was originally on the VJ label out of Chicago. Ira Sullivan and the Chicago Jazz Quintet, featuring a great tenor player by the name of Nicky Hill. And Ira only plays trumpet on that record. But there's many others where Ira plays the saxophones. And there's one record that I don't know the name of it, but he plays only soprano. And it's just beautiful. Ira left this realm 3 years ago. And he was 91 when he passed. And this year he would be 94. And we're going to do a little, his birthday is May 1st. So sometime in May, we're going to do a little celebration of Ira's life, talk to some people that knew Ira well, including his wife, Charlene, his daughter, Sunny, and his two sons, Brogan and Brevard. And also Dolph Castellano is still with us. Dolph is pushing 90 and might even have hit 90 by now. But, you know, we'll talk to Dolph and some other people that are still around. And, you know, Ira is one of those people that I talked about a little bit about, the type of musician who is not a household word, but yet influenced countless lives. There are so many musicians that were touched by Ira, and also people in general. He was, like Gary Bartz talks about music being the true religion, and Ira had his Christianity too, that he kind of combined with his, through music, kind of spreading the gospel of enjoyment of life and cherishing something beyond your ego, beyond yourself, which is the message of true religion, however you observe it, in my opinion. Anyway, we look forward to doing that in May, and we've got a lot of great guests. I hope you enjoyed my little podcast today. And, you know, thanks for watching. And once again, hope you give us a like, and subscribe. And tell your friends. This has been On the Real Side, and I'm Bob Mover. I want to thank Jessy Kaiser, who produces the show and is responsible for keeping us going in all kinds of weather, spiritual weather too. Anyway, thank you, and God bless, and see you next time.